First of all, to both of you, thanks for coming in. In relation to, and I noticed in your submission, you talked about that soils would be brought to favourable status or healthy by 2050. Can you define what that is?
There's been there's a slight change in how they've set out that whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So the proposed directive originally just said that the soil should be healthy or unhealthy, and those were the two definitions. And to be healthy, it had to meet all the criteria that is set out in the annex to the directive. Okay. Now it's changed slightly. They've had a first revision to the directive, which was circulated in mid-January there. And it's kind of gone to a more graded process of, so there's good, moderate and poor. And so the good meets all the criteria in the annex. Moderate can be missing on one of the criteria, can be failing on one of the criteria, and poor fails on two of the criteria set out in the annex. So that's kind of where it is now. And that's kind of, we were supporting that change to the directive because it was kind of a very binary thing that whether soil was healthy or unhealthy, and now there's more of a flexibility around that.
You talked about, and did I pick it up right, that they are promoting a voluntary certificate that a farmer will have in order to trade carbon if they want. Did I pick that right up?
Not quite right. They're promoting what the directive is allowing is stating that member states should have a voluntary soil health certification process for farmers and other land managers, and that shall be linked to the carbon removal certification process, so that they're kind of complementary.
So if you don't have that, you won't be getting your carbon removal.
No. So just can I add? Yeah. Sorry, please, Deputy. Just to say that, just to go back on your first point there, the soil strategy or the soil monitoring law is looking at both the physical, chemical, and the biological properties of soil. And in relation to the voluntary health certificate, this will be optional for member states.
Why are they bringing it in so?
Well, I suppose I'd just like to say, like, we're at a very early stage in negotiations at the minute. I was at a meeting on Monday in relation to this in Brussels, and we're currently working off a draft proposal that was put forward by the Spanish presidency. So we're on Rev 1 of the document, and while we agree in principle to the directive, everything within this is still under discussion, and member states have been asked to submit their comments, and it's very early days in the negotiations.
So you agree, this is your stance, so you agree that all soils should be healthy by 2050, do you?
That's the ambition of the directive, and that's
right. So that's what you agree. Tell me, what's your definition of healthy soil and peatlands?
Well, you see, the peatlands,
it's farming.
Well, you see, in relation to this directive, this is looking at all soils, and they're looking at the ecosystems.
Yeah, I'm specifically asking the question, all soils, you have to look at all soils in the country under this, yes. And you have to look at peat soils, you have mineral soils, all the soils. So what's your definition of a healthy peat soil?
Well, it's a soil that can provide as many ecosystem services as possible.
So you wouldn't be farming on that, I'd say?
No, you could be farming on it.
You cannot be farming on a healthy peatland because you'd have to re-wet it. Do you not agree? Is that, if you want to go for Annex 1, and you're pretty familiar with Annex 1, how do you get to Annex 1? The only way the national parks can do it at the moment in Annex 1 is by re-wetting. Is that right or wrong, to get sphagnum mosses grown? Is that correct?
Well, the soil monitoring law doesn't specifically get into the peat soils per se. It doesn't set out any specific actions in relation to peat soils. Where peat soils are referred to would be in the nature restoration law.
Yeah, I know that, and I'm fully, that's one headache for us, but I'm talking about mountains and I'm talking about lowland peat soils, where if you want to regardless of what the peat soil, the directive is a straight carte blanche over all soils in the line of getting them all healthy by 2050. Would you agree that?
And that's the ambition.
That's the ambition, right. And it's like the monitoring you have to do for the designated areas every 4 or 5 years. You have to get scientific stuff. Is it poor? Is it moderate? Is it good? Right? And then you get a slap on the wrist from our good buddies in Europe, in the European Court, where you'll be referred because you didn't bring it to favourable status. That's the way it works at the moment for anybody that has followed the Habitats Directive. So what I am asking you, what is favourable status on a peat soil that you're farming?
Well, you see, that's still up for negotiation here, because the question was asked, and as I said, member states this is still up for negotiation and comments, and it was asked at the meeting the other day, if a soil is in moderate status, is that considered acceptable? So we don't have clarification on that at this point in time.
How could it be acceptable if our ambition is to have them all a favourable status?
Well, you see, it's by 2050.
Yeah, but like, you get them to, first of all, on a peat soil, for anyone that knows anything about it, the Habitats Directive had a 30-year span to try and get it that, and it wasn't fit to do it in a lot of cases on the Annex 1, because obviously it takes an awful lot of work, and the only way they were able to try it was re-wetting. Have you a LiDAR system done already on all the sides of Ireland? I understood that the department was going doing that along with OPW 2 years ago.
Well, the department is working currently on updating a peat soils map for the country. And
was the LiDAR done? There was a contract supposed to be given out. We had a committee meeting here where the Department of Agriculture stated that they were going to, the Northern Ireland actually were doing theirs, and we were advised at the time to make sure that it was done on a 15 square metre, that it would check carbon as well as everything else. Was that ever done?
I don't think that's completed yet, no.
Was it ever broached in there?
I'm not sure. I'll have to come back to you on that.
I'm not sure either.
Right. The other thing, in relation to soils and in P's and K's, will it affect it that way?
It'll measure, part of the measurements will be N, P's and K's, as well as a range of other chemicals, properties.
And is it done on a regional, national, or what basis?
It sets out that you have soil districts within the member state, and that can be at nuts regional level. So it could be just on a national level for Ireland, or it's up to the member state whether it wants to bring that down further into different levels or lower levels. So
you're compiling, say, soil types in the different areas of the country at the moment. I think Chagus's figures and what the EPA had are two totally different figures at the moment. You're compiling that at the moment, and my question to you is that if you we'll take the west of Ireland, we'll go to Listowel in Kerry, just because I know it fairly well, where there's cows out in the fields, and that originally was peat soil, peaty bog. How do you get that to favourable status?
Well, the directive sets out in the annex the kind of things that you're measuring, okay?
But is it all site? What I'm trying to establish here, the nature restoration law has certain targets, but is it all soils in the country that's under this directive?
Yes, is the answer to that.
Yes, right. So we'll stay with Listowel then, and we'll stay with the Frisian cows in the field down there that has been shored, gravel tunnelled, and drains put round it. But when we go back in our maps, and when we look at what it was one time, it was where you could turf, to put it simple. How do we get to there? What's going to happen in the line of that? Farmers needs to know what's coming down the line.
When the measurements are taken on that soil, they'll be assessed against the criteria in the annex as to whether they're meeting the criteria or not.
Which, you cannot, in all fairness, you cannot meet the criteria. If you have bog, if you have peat, if you have shores pushing it every 7 years that the EU actually paid the farmers to do, if you have drains put round it, well, you cannot meet the criteria of it being a peatland what it was 50 or 60 years ago. So tell me, how do we square that?
It doesn't necessarily have to meet the criteria of being a peatland of what it was 50 years ago. It has to meet good soil health condition in its current status, and it may well continue to meet that in its new farming system. And there is opportunities for the member state to determine what is the soil management practices that should be in place for different types of soils and things. So that's at member state level that is set. And so for soils that have been drained, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to restore them all to the.
Just sorry now, but we'll just get one thing clear. You cannot get active raised bog without, because like I've worked at the national parks and this, and I've spent years at it. You cannot get active raised bog growing unless you re-wet. Like, there's no in between on that.
I understand that, the point you're making, but I'm saying to you is that the status that the soil is in, or the condition that the soil and the farming practices that are taking place on the soil currently, may mean that it will still be allowed to continue.
Right, but okay, so if that's
under the soil's monitoring,
let's simplify it a bit. If that comes out the first day as poor, right? Just poor, and something else medium, something else is good. Has that poor, under this directive, to come up to favourable status by 2050?
That poor is to come up to favourable status by 2050. That's the ambition of the directive, and it depending on what criteria it's failed. It's for poorness. It's been determined to be poor on. Will determine the actions that have to be taken to. So if it's.
Yeah, but it's absolutely why. Has anyone stood back in your department or a minister? And I know, in fairness to Minister McGonagall, I know that it's not your department that has the lead in it. Am I right in that? It's actually Mr. Ryan and co. In Environment. Like, we're signing up to something here, in my opinion, that down the road is going to bite us in the ass. Because we cannot, I know, like, I come from, like, if it was the Golden Vale that I lived in, you wouldn't have a worry because you have the soil type. But if you live in Donegal, or you live in the West, or you live in the Midlands, and you come from a peaty soil that has been, that the same EU, as I say, give grants to drain, they're in the hope in God of making, first of all, the status you're going to get, if you have it showered and drained around it where you have green grass growing, because you made land out, to put it simple, and you dig down and it is peat, right? There's no point in saying it's not. There is alarm bells ringing between the nature restoration law, but this as well, for that type of a soil in those areas. Do you not agree? Well,
I suppose what the directive, firstly anyway, the districts, we have yet to define the districts, and that's under discussion, right? So that's unlikely. We're not going to get down to individual farmer level.
No, but like, we don't have to. But I'm talking about regional.
That's number one. And number two, then we'll have to set out, like, there's a number of physical tests, chemical tests and biological tests that are being proposed in this proposed directive. Now, currently member states are looking for flexibility around the number of tests that they have to carry out under this directive. The number of flexibility, do we have to do all these tests or only some of these tests? Can we do a suite of these tests? Regardless of what type of soil, then, if we have flexibility around these tests, like we're looking at the physical, chemical and biological properties. So, and there's thresholds then set out in relation to these tests, like if they're over a threshold or under a threshold, then that gives rise to its status. It doesn't get into what happened before this directive in this status. So if it meets, for argument's sake, a bulk density test, or if it meets phosphorus, or if it's biologically active, well then the soil could be deemed as in good status. And if it doesn't, then farmers are going to be asked to take steps, a number of practices. And many of our farmers, we've got to remember, are in receipt of looked after under CAP, and they're looking after their land under cap.
Sorry, they're looked after under cap because food was subsidised. They're not looked after under cap for doing different things now with their land on top of the subsidisation.
Yes, but many of the practices that we're carrying out in CAP are promoting good soil practices in relation to this directive.
All I'd say to you is, in my opinion, I'm shocked that the department is actually going with this directive or endorsing it. I'm not surprised that Eamon Ryan would, because like sure, climate action will go with anything at the moment. But the writing is on the wall if that isn't nailed for the people with the soils of lesser quality, in my opinion, from what you have stated here today. And I don't know what flexibilities you're talking about, but in my opinion, there's only one flexibility that I would go for, and that's just to nail it at the beginning. Because if we take this in, it's not now, and I'm not saying it'll be your fault or anything, but it's down the road. You're after saying there, the farmer single farm payment, the farmer will basically, the single farm payment will be basically the gun to the head that you have to do X, Y, and Z, or if you don't, you won't be getting it. No more than what's coming in.
No, I didn't say that. What I did say is that farmers that are currently in receipt of single farm payment are respecting a number of good agricultural and environment conditions, and many of those are contributing to good soil management, which would align themselves with what this directive is trying to propose, that farmers and that land is managed in certain a way that is maintained in a good
status. I'll give you the example.
This is not linked to farm payments.
Right, I'll give you the example.
I'll leave you back in, Michael. Can we go round and I'll come back?
1 second, one question. I'll give you the example. It wasn't your department that done it. It's Europe that's sending it in. That from next August on, I'm correct in saying, that if I have land in under the single farm payment or the BIS, and it's of a peaty nature, that when I sign my single farm payment, to won't affect, I want to be clear on this, not this May, I think August is the deadline, that if I go for the single farm payment the following year, I'll be stating that I will not put any new drain, and I will not shore, and I will not plough that land to qualify for my payment that I got before, the year before and the year before, without any of them clauses. Am I correct in that?
I don't think those have been finalised, that's GAC or 2 you're talking about, and it hasn't been finalised what's going to be included in GAC 2 yet.
Well, isn't it for scheduling in August?
It's to be coming in, I understand.
26, is it?
25, I think.
25.
25. But August, I think we have to have agreed to it. Is that correct?
I think we'll have to have it to agree to.
Am I right in that?
Yeah, it's not my area of responsibility.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not saying that you do. And in fairness, our department had no say worth a damn because it came from Europe. Yeah. And I'm not blaming you in any way. What I'm saying is,
been introduced as the latest date.
That we need to watch a directive coming in. We had the Habitats Directive. We have the Water Framework Directive. We'll have this Soils Directive. We will have the Nature Restoration. And if we don't watch tight, we are going to leave farmers in marginal land that they'll be looking at a theme park, not farming.
Michael, I'll leave you back in.
There is an alternative view that all those regulations will provide opportunities for farmers as well.